They found her car at the Johnsville Park and Pool on a June afternoon in 2013. A parked shell in a quiet lot, unnaturally still. Inside, a wallet lay where it had been set down, a stack of clothing folded or draped, as if someone had planned to return. The one thing that might explain everything, the keys, were gone. That small, stubborn absence turned a commonplace scene into a riddle, a life paused mid-step, a trail that ends at an empty driver's seat. Kimberly Rose Abercrombie was 23, a mother whose days were measured by school drop-offs and bedtime stories, a wife whose partner served miles away in uniform. She carried scars and stories the way others carry photographs, in ink on her skin and in the quiet corners of a household that kept on without her. When she did not come home, the ordinary rhythms of family life ruptured into an ache that could not be mended with explanations that never came. How can a woman so loved, so visible, simply disappear while leaving behind everything except the truth? That question hangs over this town like a low cloud, settling into conversation and then into silence, demanding answers that have not arrived. Stay with me through this search for what was lost. Subscribe and keep her name living in the light rather than fading into rumor and forgetfulness. To begin, we must know the woman who vanished. At 23 years old, Kimberly Rose Abercrombie's world was a fragile balance between the responsibilities she held close and the struggles she could not always escape. In Brooksville, Kentucky, she was known not just as another face in a small town, but as a young mother with a little boy who depended on her for everything, and as the wife of a man serving overseas in the military. While her husband wore his uniform in distant places, Kimberly carried the weight of home, trying to anchor herself in the rhythm of family life, while facing down the shadows of addiction that had followed her for years. Her story was written not only in memories, but on her very skin. Tattoos stretched across her body, each one a fragment of identity, a diary without pages. A fairy with roses woven into its wings lingered across her lower back, as if to suggest flight weighed down by beauty and burden. A teal ribbon marked her thigh, a symbol of awareness and survival etched into flesh, a silent testimony that she wanted life, that she was fighting for it. A butterfly, fragile and free, spread its wings along her ankle, a reminder of transformation, or perhaps the change she longed for. The name of her son, Zane Austen, written into the tender space of her foot, made her devotion permanent. Every line of ink was more than art. It was a map of her spirit, showing the parts of her she wanted remembered. Yet Kimberly was more than symbols. She was a daughter who had once been a little girl playing under the Kentucky sky, a woman with laughter that her family recalled, and a mother whose days often revolved around the small, ordinary tasks that build love quietly, preparing meals, folding laundry, making sure her boy knew he was cherished. Even in the midst of hardship, she was present in these ways that matter most, and those closest to her did not define her by her struggles, but by her heart. Addiction is a quiet thief, but it cannot erase love. It cannot erase the memory of a young woman brushing her child's hair back with gentle hands, or her habit of carrying small notebooks where she scribbled thoughts and dreams. It cannot erase the fact that when her husband was away, she still held on to the thread of marriage, waiting for him, imagining the day he would return to find them whole again. Kimberly's world was complex, as all lives are. It contained contradictions, strength and fragility, light and shadow, mistakes and redemption. To her family, she was not a story of what went wrong. She was a promise of what could still be right, if only given more time. It is this portrait we must hold on to, because before the mystery of her disappearance begins, there was a life, full and imperfect, with a young woman who mattered deeply. And it is from that world of fragile hope that she suddenly vanished, leaving only questions behind. From here, we must turn to the stage on which her story unfolded.
Brooksville, Kentucky stretched across gentle hills and farmland, a town where the rhythm of life moved slowly and predictably. The roads were narrow, lined with trees whose branches tangled above like quiet sentinels watching over the small houses and the occasional roadside store. In such towns, everyone's movements were known, every neighbor's routines memorized, and the absence of one person could ripple through the community like a stone thrown into still water. Life appeared ordinary, almost comforting, yet beneath the familiar faces and slow chatter, there lingered a quiet that could suffocate. In towns like this, silence carries weight. It collects in empty porches, along the edges of streets, and in conversations that end too soon. The Kentucky 9AA highway cut through this landscape, a route traveled by locals as much for errands as for escape into the surrounding countryside. Along this stretch, the Johnsville Park and pool stood modestly, a place meant for children's laughter, for families to gather on hot summer afternoons, for the ordinary gestures that stitch a community together. It was a place where people felt safe, where the mundane and the joyful met. But on one June day in 2013, this ordinary scene transformed into something ominous. The quiet hum of cicadas and the scent of freshly cut grass could not disguise the unease settling over the park. A car sat abandoned in the lot, its windows catching the sun at an angle that made it gleam like a warning, its contents whispering stories that would never be fully told. Even the landscape itself seemed complicit in the mystery. The air carried the heaviness of anticipation, the kind that comes when something is missing, yet everywhere present in its absence. The trees swayed gently, indifferent to the anguish they now oversaw, while shadows stretched long across the cracked asphalt, hinting at a story frozen in time. Every corner of the park, every swing set, every ripple in the pool reflected the intrusion of questions into a place built for certainty and routine. What had begun as an ordinary day of summer became the stage for a disappearance that would haunt the town for years to come. In Brooksville, people still remember how the ordinary turned strange in an instant, how a community that prided itself on knowing each other could be so suddenly faced with a puzzle that none could solve. The roads, the houses, the park itself became silent witnesses to a story that refused closure, a story that demanded attention, that demanded remembrance. And from this quiet, sunlit stage, Kimberly Rose Abercrombie's last steps would soon begin to fade into the shadow of uncertainty.
It was a June morning in 2013 when Kimberly Rose Abercrombie stepped out of her home, a small, familiar house in Brooksville, Kentucky, with the sun already climbing into the sky. She told those around her she would return, her voice carrying the ordinary certainty of a routine day. She kissed her son's cheek, exchanged brief words with neighbors, and locked the door behind her. A gesture so mundane that no one could have predicted it would be the last time she would be seen. The world outside seemed ordinary, warm, indifferent, unaware that a young mother's life was about to be swallowed by a silence that would stretch for years. Her plans, tentative as they were, may have taken her towards Cincinnati, Ohio, a drive she had made before. Perhaps she sought the comfort of familiarity, a momentary escape, or merely the movement of wheels on asphalt to calm restless thoughts. But somewhere along that path, her journey ceased. There are no witnesses to the precise moment she vanished, no footprints leading to answers, no cries that reached ears attuned to her presence. The ordinary transformed into a void almost immediately, leaving behind a question that has never been answered. Where did she go, and why did she not return? Hours passed, and the first signs of unease emerged. Her car, a vessel that should have carried her safely home, was discovered at Johnsville Park and Pool. The vehicle rested in the lot as if paused mid-thought, holding within it the remnants of a life suddenly suspended. Clothes were draped across the seats, folded or tossed with the casual precision of someone planning to come back. Her wallet lay where she had left it, familiar and mundane, yet now ominously significant. And yet the keys were gone, the one small object that might have explained her movements or unlocked the path she had taken. Beyond the metal and glass of the car, Kimberly herself had vanished, leaving only the silent testimony of a life interrupted. The scene felt frozen in time, a photograph of absence that spoke volumes. There was the faint shimmer of sunlight on the dashboard, the subtle rumble of distant traffic along Kentucky 9AA highway, the whisper of wind through the leaves. All ordinary details, yet all now layered with tension, with the sense that something terrible had occurred in a place that should have been safe. The park, once a space of laughter and summer afternoons, became a canvas for questions, each unanswered, each heavier than the last. And as the town began to sense the enormity of what had happened, the ordinary rhythms of Brooksville were broken. Time stretched around the disappearance, the hours growing heavy with dread as neighbors glanced toward the horizon, families whispered possibilities, and a community that prided itself on knowing everyone confronted the unthinkable. A young mother had simply vanished, leaving behind the smallest hints of her existence and the largest absence of all. From that suspended moment, the search would begin, and the town itself would awaken to the ripple effects of a life gone missing.
The news of Kimberly's disappearance spread quickly, though in a town like Brooksville, quickly still carried the unhurried cadence of rural life. Her family was the first to feel the full weight of absence. Her husband, stationed miles away in the rigid discipline of military service, learned through fractured updates that the woman he loved, the mother of his child, was gone. Each word he received felt distant, almost unreal, as if the miles between them had suddenly widened into a chasm that swallowed certainty and replaced it with dread. At home, a small boy waited, clutching toys, looking toward the door again and again, not understanding why the one person who should have returned never did. His eyes sought her in every shadow, in every sound, and found only silence. The town itself stirred, a quiet unease rippling through the streets and porches. Police cars began to appear, their blue lights reflecting in the windows of neighbors who whispered among themselves, straining to fill in gaps with conjecture. In Brooksville, where everyone knew everyone else's movements, the disruption was tangible. Doors were opened cautiously. Neighbors lingered in their yards, scanning the familiar roads for signs of the missing woman. Prayers rose quietly in kitchens and living rooms, hands clasped over hearts, while others muttered speculations that fell into the growing silence with a weight heavier than certainty could bear. Rumors began to take shape, like shadows stretching over the landscape. Some claimed she had overdosed, a whispered explanation meant to make sense of the senseless. Others said the people who had been with her panicked, that fear had turned them into unwilling conspirators in a story they could not face. There were those who suggested her body had been hidden, erased from the town's consciousness to avoid consequence. None of these stories could be verified. None could be proven. Yet each rumor carried its own chill, and each added to the mounting tension that gripped the community like a slow, unyielding fog. As the hours and then days stretched on, the search became both physical and emotional. Volunteers scoured the edges of town, the riverbanks, the wooded hills beyond the highways, calling her name into the wind as if their voices could tether her back from wherever she had gone. Law enforcement followed every lead, examined every clue, yet the truth remained elusive, hiding just beyond reach. The absence became a presence of its own, a shadow that pressed against the hearts of all who knew her, filling spaces that once held routine, warmth, and laughter. In the quiet moments between search parties and whispered rumors, the town itself seemed to hold its breath. Every neighbor wondered what they might have missed. Every friend questioned whether a small act overlooked had made all the difference. And while the sun rose and set with its familiar rhythm, the boy at home and the husband far away felt time fracture, each moment stretching into an eternity defined by waiting, hoping, and fearing the worst. The search had begun, but the answers it sought remained just out of reach, leaving only the palpable tension of uncertainty to fill the spaces Kimberly had once inhabited. And from this unsettled, anxious stillness, the investigation would begin to unravel, each step revealing not only what was known, but the haunting weight of what could never be easily understood.
The investigation began as a search for answers, yet the answers were stubbornly absent. Investigators scoured the town, piecing together fragments of a life interrupted, yet every lead seemed to dissolve the moment it was grasped. The abandoned car at Johnsville became the center of scrutiny, its interior a quiet testament to presence and absence at once. Clothes and a wallet sat undisturbed, almost carefully positioned, yet the keys, the simplest instrument that could explain the next step of her journey, were gone. That omission, small to some, gnawed at the narrative, a silent accusation that someone, somewhere, held pieces of a puzzle the rest of the world could not see. Foul play hovered like a shadow over every inquiry. The possibility that Kimberly had been harmed drew investigators into the dark corners of the town's whispered histories, into alleys of suspicion where every neighbor became a question mark. Yet no one stepped forward, no confession emerged, no body was ever recovered. Each day the trail grew colder, the certainty of truth slipping further into the distance. Rumors ignited, spreading quickly among a town already straining to understand the unthinkable. Some spoke of overdose, imagining an accident born of desperation. Others suggested intentional concealment, a panicked circle of people scrambling to erase the evidence of a tragedy. And still others whispered of darker intentions, stories with no foundation, yet the weight of their repetition lent them a haunting plausibility. For Kimberly's family, every rumor was a knife edged in uncertainty. They chased every thread, followed every hint, only to meet the emptiness at the center of each lead. Love and fear collided in sleepless nights, in quiet meals eaten with hands trembling, in endless replays of the last day she was seen. Each unanswered question etched deeper into hearts already raw with loss. The police moved systematically, cautiously, yet even with diligence the road was littered with dead ends. Evidence evaporated into possibility. Witnesses remembered fragments that often contradicted one another, and the tangible trail of a young mother's disappearance dissolved under the weight of time. The key that should have unlocked her path, the key that was never found, became a symbol not just of what was missing, but of the stubborn silence that had settled over her story.
As days turned into weeks and months, the investigation became a delicate dance with shadows. Every clue was examined, every lead pursued, yet the town remained suspended in uncertainty, each corner and field holding secrets that refused to yield. The frustration of her family was mirrored by the investigators' own growing sense of impotence, a shared helplessness born of knowing that somewhere between the ordinary routines of a June day and the abandoned car at Johnsville, the truth had vanished. And from this tension, from this silence of leads that led nowhere, the story of Kimberly's disappearance would stretch forward into years of unanswered questions. A cold case's weight would only grow heavier with time.
Time began to stretch in strange, unforgiving ways after Kimberly Rose Abercrombie vanished. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, each one carrying its own weight of absence. The calendar's pages flipped relentlessly, marking birthdays celebrated quietly without her presence. Anniversaries that should have been ordinary reminders of love and routine, now heavy with missing moments. Each date became a reminder that life had moved forward, yet she had not. Her son grew under the shadow of a mother who existed only in memories and photographs. He learned the shape of her smile from family albums, traced the lines of her face on screens and in fading snapshots, and asked questions that adults could not answer. The absence of his mother became a constant companion, a silent teacher of uncertainty and longing. Every milestone he reached carried a hollow echo of her guidance, her laughter, her presence. Her husband, far away in uniform when she disappeared, carried grief in ways no duty could shield him from. The rigor of military life, the discipline it demanded, offered no protection against the gnawing ache of unanswered questions. Nights were long and quiet, punctuated by thoughts of a life that had been interrupted and could not be resumed. Each missed call, each unreturned message, each empty doorway at home became a reminder that the world had shifted irreversibly. For the family, the passing years were a relentless pendulum between hope and heartbreak. Every rumor, every tip that surfaced felt like a possibility, a spark of hope that might illuminate the truth. Yet each lead fizzled into disappointment, leaving the heart heavier than before. The community moved on in small, incremental ways, but for those closest to Kimberly, time was a cruel measure, a reminder that life continued even when answers did not. As the case faded from news headlines, it never faded from the hearts and minds of those who loved her. Every quiet street, every familiar road in Brooksville became a testament to absence, a place where memory and longing converged. Shadows lengthened in empty rooms, echoes lingered in hallways, and every moment without answers deepened the sense of something lost forever. Through these years, the story of Kimberly did not die. It settled into the marrow of those who awaited closure, a cold case etched with hope and sorrow alike. And as time pressed on, the unresolved truth loomed ever larger, setting the stage for the possibility of discovery and for the fragile promise that one day answers might arrive.
In most cases, the passage of years eventually yields a glimmer of light, a fingerprint, a witness, a confession that turns despair into closure. But for Kimberly Rose Abercrombie, the passage of time has offered no such reprieve. Over a decade has slipped by, each year folding neatly into the next, yet the elusive breakthrough that could have unraveled the mystery has remained stubbornly absent. Tips emerge occasionally, rumors swell and fade like smoke in the wind, whispers of overdose, panic, or foul play rising only to dissolve under the weight of reality. Every lead that promised hope has fizzled into silence, leaving her family grasping at echoes of what might have been. Investigators revisit her case, scanning old evidence, retracing her last known steps, yet the answers remain locked behind an impenetrable wall. The car left at Johnsville still holds its quiet testimony. Belongings neatly in place, the keys forever missing, the story forever incomplete. For those who loved her, the lack of closure is a persistent ache, a shadow that refuses to lighten. Birthdays pass unmarked by her laughter, milestones are quietly acknowledged in her absence, and her young son continues to grow up with the puzzle of his mother unresolved, his imagination filling gaps with questions adults cannot answer. The silence is more than absence. It is a presence of its own, pressing against the lives of those left behind, shaping their days and nights, a constant reminder that a life once full of motion, of laughter, of imperfection and love has been suspended mid-step. Every anniversary, every news cycle that omits her story, every conversation that ends with "we'll never know," deepens the resonance of what has not happened, the breakthrough that could have brought truth, closure, justice, even a measure of peace. And it is in this relentless void, this decade-long pause, that Kimberly's story becomes more haunting than any revelation ever could. The unanswered questions linger in the corners of Brooksville, in the eyes of a boy who never knew his mother fully, in the heart of a husband who still waits across the miles, in the minds of a community left to speculate and remember. The breakthrough never arrived, and in its absence, the story presses forward, heavier and more sorrowful, a reminder that some mysteries endure not because of complexity alone, but because the world itself refuses to yield its secrets. From this silence, the story stretches onward, toward the enduring question of what comes next, and how a life suspended can leave a mark on everyone it touched.
In most stories, this moment delivers a climax, a revelation that rearranges everything the audience thought they knew. There is usually a face, a name, a moment when the scales of justice tip, when betrayal is exposed and the tangled threads of a mystery are drawn tight. But in Brooksville, that moment has never come. No one has stepped forward. No confession has fractured the silence. No arrest has punctuated the years of uncertainty. The expected twist, the unmasking of a culprit, remains stubbornly absent, leaving the story suspended in a limbo, heavier than any revelation could ever be. The cruel twist in Kimberly Rose Abercrombie's case is not a person, not a confession, not the courtroom drama that often gives narrative its release. It is the void itself, the gnawing sense that some truths exist just out of reach, and that perhaps there are those who carry fragments of knowledge they will never reveal. Suspicion lingers in the air like a thick, unmoving fog, wrapping the town and its people in a collective unease. Every familiar street corner, every house along Kentucky 9 AA Highway, every quiet backyard seems to hold secrets, invisible yet palpably present. The absence of accountability presses against the community in ways that justice ordinarily would have alleviated. For her family, the weight is nearly unbearable. The husband, once stationed far away in service, lives with the haunting question of whether answers exist somewhere just beyond his grasp. The boy grows up with the lingering shadow of what should have been, a mother, a guide, a presence he can never fully know. Each passing year deepens the sense of betrayal, not by a person, but by a system that has yielded no closure, by the quiet complicity of unknown hands that may know more than they will ever reveal. The town itself absorbs this tension, its daily rhythms underscored by a low hum of uncertainty. Conversations pause when her name is mentioned. Eyes shift at unspoken suspicions.
The familiar becomes uncanny. The ordinary streets of Brooksville carry an invisible weight, as if the earth itself remembers the day Kimberly disappeared and refuses to let the story rest. Every unturned stone, every untold whisper, every unasked question becomes part of the narrative, part of the suspense that refuses resolution. And in this enduring vacuum, the story grows more haunting than any dramatic revelation could have made it. The twist is not who did it, but that no one has, or perhaps ever will, face the reckoning the case demands. The absence of justice, the unfulfilled expectations of closure, shapes the story itself, leaving a town, a family, and a boy forever poised on the edge of questions that will never be answered. From this unrelenting silence, the narrative moves forward, into the spaces of reflection and memory, where the aftermath of loss begins to take its hold.
In most stories, this chapter would carry the weight of a courtroom, a gavel striking finality, witnesses recounting truths that illuminate the darkness, a jury deliberating the fate of a perpetrator. But for Kimberly Rose Abercrombie, the courtroom has remained a hollow space, echoing with absence rather than testimony. No jury has convened, no gavel has fallen, no law has been meted out. The trial that exists in her story is not one of legal proceedings, but of endurance, of a family forced into a decade-long reckoning with questions that will never find answers. Her husband carries this trial in the quiet spaces of his life, every memory of Kimberly replaying with the intensity of unasked questions, every missed call, every empty doorway, every bedtime without her presence becomes a verdict pronounced daily, shaping the rhythms of grief, loss, and longing. Her son, growing under the shadow of absence, learns early the lessons of uncertainty, the weight of hope that must remain unfulfilled. Each birthday, each milestone, each school recital becomes a silent hearing, where the only witnesses are memories and photographs, and the only judgment is the unrelenting ache of what cannot be known. The silence of the community amplifies this trial. Conversations skirt around her disappearance. Glances linger longer than necessary, and the ordinary streets of Brooksville are haunted by what is left unspoken. Every whisper of rumor, every unverified claim becomes a shadow jury in its own right, rendering a judgment not on truth, but on speculation. The investigation's failures and the absence of definitive answers become an omnipresent sentence weighing on the hearts of those left behind. Each day, the family lives with the paradox of justice denied and questions unending. The trial is internal, perpetual, and unrelenting. It is the rehearsal of loss, a relentless repetition of why, how, and when, with no verdict ever given. The courtroom of silence presides over every memory, every anniversary, every fleeting hope that one day the truth might emerge. And yet, even in this unyielding trial, the human spirit endures, carrying love, memory, and the quiet, stubborn hope that answers may still come. And as the years accumulate, this trial of silence shapes the very landscape of their lives, setting the stage for reflection, remembrance, and the enduring search for closure that has yet to arrive.
Even years later, the absence of Kimberly Rose Abercrombie is palpable in every corner of her family's life. Her room, once filled with the faint traces of a young mother's presence, remains a silent monument to a life interrupted. The tattoos that once spoke of her individuality, her battles, her dreams, now linger as ghostly reminders of the woman who vanished, each symbol a fragment of a story incomplete, a life paused mid-breath.
Her son grows under the quiet weight of questions that have no answers. Every milestone, every laugh, every first experience carries the echo of a mother he can barely remember. A presence he should have felt guiding his steps, holding his hand, whispering reassurance in the dark. The void she left shapes him in ways subtle and profound, a life constructed in parallel to the mother who was taken too soon, or who disappeared without explanation. Her husband, once distant in military service, now shoulders the relentless ache of uncertainty, the memory of a wife whose fate is unknown. Days are punctuated not by events, but by the absence of closure, the lingering question of whether someone, somewhere, knows the truth and remains silent. The family's grief is measured in moments of stillness, in quiet corners, in memories that refuse to fade. The community, too, carries fragments of her story. Conversations pause when her name arises, and whispers circulate as neighbors and friends speculate, and wonder. The park at Johnsville, the roads she traveled, the spaces she once occupied, they are all etched with memory, mystery, and unanswered questions. Kimberly's disappearance is more than a missing person case. It is a wound that marks everyone it touched, a reminder that life's certainty can shift in an instant. Her story continues to ripple through time, a haunting presence that demands attention and remembrance. Until the day truth surfaces, Kimberly Rose Abercrombie remains both a warning and a testament, that no life should vanish into silence, that no family should endure endless uncertainty, that every missing person's story deserves to be remembered. If Kimberly's story moved you, keep her name alive by subscribing to this channel, because in remembering her, we honor not only her life, but the lives of all those still searching for answers.